Hey everyone, this is the Love of Cinema podcast. We like to talk movies. If you like to talk movies too, you come to the right place.
The other trait of Ray, which is there in Arranyer Din Ratri, specifically in that after the picnic shot when Ashim and Aparna are discussing, and also when they go to find the Chowkidar's wife, that whenever there is a dialogue between two characters, which is of importance in the sense that is creating a tension of sorts and so on and so forth, then you will find that that's a two shot, right? But it's almost never an over the shoulder shot. It is always both the characters in different depths of reference looking at the camera. You will find that in Opus Sangsar, you'll find that in Charulata, you'll find that in Mahanagar, you'll find that in Shimabadho, and also in Arranyer Din Ratri, or any film. I'm just mentioning the ones which came to my mind. So that is a very typical Ray frame.
Hey folks, this is Himanshu, and you're listening to the Love of Cinema podcast. What's your favorite Satyajit Ray film? It's a difficult question, but gun to head, many might choose the Appu trilogy, or Jalsaghar, or Devi. Others might pick Charulata, or Nayak, or Mahanagar. Personally, my favorite is Nayak, but a very close second is the director's magnificent 1970 adaptation of Sunil Gangopadhyay's Arranyer Din Ratri. I had originally planned an episode on Nayak with today's guest, but since Arranyer Din Ratri turns 50 this year, we chose to do an episode in celebration of its 50th birthday. All things Arranyer Din Ratri on this episode with Amitava Nag. But before that, if you're a first-time listener, do check out prior episodes of the podcast. You can find all episodes on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or any of the other pod apps. If you enjoy organic conversations centered on Indian cinema and streaming shows, Love of Cinema podcast was created for people just like you. So do consider subscribing. Also, please do rate and review the podcast in Apple Podcasts, as that will help others with similar taste discover this podcast. So if you like the episode, please rate and review us and help us spread the word. That would be much appreciated. Back to today's episode. Arranyer Din Ratri is a special film for several reasons. One of which is that it marks a pivotal juncture in Ray's career. You can approach Ray's towering canon in two parts: his films before Arranyer and the films he made after Arranyer. Amitava Nag, an independent film critic and the man behind the wonderful book Satyajit Ray's Heroes and Heroines, joins us on this episode to chat about why the film marks the pivotal juncture, and also to talk about the craft behind the film, some of the key scenes like the memory game scene and the phone number scene, the carnivalesque aspect of the story, and the legacy of the film. We also chatted about the beautiful medium long shots, Ray's cinematic signatures, the recurring motif of a circle, the interesting contrast between the characters of Aparna and Jaya, differences between the novel and the film, and the film's Chekhovian structure. This episode is my small attempt to rekindle interest in one of Ray's most layered pictures, which deserves much more love, in my opinion, and deserves to be spoken of in the same breath as other widely acknowledged masterpieces by Ray. Here's my chat with Amitava Nag in celebration of Arranyer Din Ratri. Hi Amitava, thank you for coming on the podcast to talk about one of Ray's magnificent pictures. How are you doing?
I'm fine, and thank you for inviting me. I've been following your podcast, and I'm quite liking it.
Thank you so much. Amitava, let's begin our discussion by briefly talking about what makes Arranyer Din Ratri such a special Satyajit Ray film. And I wanted to start by quoting Sharmila Tagore, who had this to say about the women in Ray's films. In Ray's films, the women are of superior moral sensibilities, and the men are like helpless children. The women understand the men better, and the men are still trying to find themselves. I can't think of a film by Ray which proclaims that observation in a more layered way than this film. So, for starters, for me personally, that's one reason why Arranyer Din Ratri is so special. And I'll also quickly list a couple of other things why I think it's special, and then I would love to hear your take on it. For me, it's arguably Ray's most captivating film. It's Ray's cinematic signatures are front and center. It's also one of the more interesting films in world cinema employing the carnivalesque technique. And in case some of the listeners are not familiar with that particular literary tradition of carnivalesque, no worries, we'll talk about it more later in the episode. But what would you say makes this film such a special film?
Yeah. So as you rightly said, Arranyer Din Ratri holds a very specific and special place in the entire race filmography. Um, this was made in 1969, though released in 1970, which makes it 50 years this year. And if you look at the politics of Bengal at the time, so we had that the Naxalite movement. It started off in 1967 and went on till probably the middle of the 70s in full bloom, and then slowly it started winning out. But during that time, from the 67 till 69, Ray was constantly criticized by a section of the intelligentsia that he was actually looking away from the realities of the day. So if you look at the films which he was making at the time, it was 1966, he made Nayok, and then he made Chiriyakhana, which was a detective film. And then he made Gupi Gain Baghabain, which was by far his most successful one in terms of the box office returns. And then in 1970, he made in 1969, but this film got released in 1970. And if we look now retrospectively at Ray's entire body of work, then the films which were to come later on in 1970s, the early part of 70s, the Calcutta trilogy, those films, Ray had a very distinct and different vision. His vision shifted from his earlier philosophy, his earlier dealing of things. And I think Arranyer Din Ratri, or in English it is called Days and Nights in the Forest, is actually a precursor to the things which are going to come. So he was never a very political filmmaker the way probably Mrinal Sen was, or to an extent Ritik Ghatak was, but he was polemical, no doubt. And Arranyer Din Ratri is the first film in this change of stance, if I may say. And what is very interesting to observe is that he was raising certain questions which he never asked before, in terms of racism, in terms of the importance of money, the 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 difference of classes, the consumerist society, and coming out at large. And he is actually questioning a new false hybridity of the neo-colonial class in terms of the corruption of the middle class, the corruption of the bourgeois middle class, and so on and so forth. And very interestingly, we understand that this is sort of a film of journeys, not in terms of the narrative journey of the individual characters, but the emotional journey of at least few of the characters. And he also had a few sort of journey films before, in the sense that Kanchenjunga is a journey film, Nayok is a journey film. But in both those films, the earlier films, it was about individuals who were not very common, in the sense that the hero or the main old man of Kanchenjunga, played by Chobi Biswas, he was a Rai Bahadur, so he was someone who was special. And in Nayok, the hero was special because he was the matinee idol of sorts. But this is the one where these characters were not were pretty common people. common middle class educated Bengali men. And for the first time, we are seeing that the hero of Ray's film is not someone who is noble, not someone who has a light within him, like, say, for example, Opu or the hero of Charulata Omol. He is not above flaws. He's not he. These four characters are quite flawed. So I think uh, if you see Ray's philosophy in the early films, he was more Nehruvian in his uh, in his in his vision. I think from Arranyer Din Ratri, his vision started changing a bit, and he was trying to understand uh, the young men and women of that time. Previously, if we see that he was always trying to understand the people who were of a different time. They were not contemporary. Apart from Mohanabad, they were not contemporary. But I think from Arranyer Din Ratri, he was trying to understand the men on the streets, the men who were changing in that period between 1965 and 70. So I think from that perspective, this is a very important junction in Ray's cinematic career. So his cinematic vision changed from Arranyer Din Ratri.
So I guess, in a sense, we can look at Ray's canon as, in fact, before Arranyer and then after Arranyer, in a sense.
Yes, I think so. I think it, and if you look at the mention of Ray's films in the Western world, I'm not saying that whatever is there in the Western world is something which is great and it should always be followed. But I'm just saying as a reflection, if you see that more or less Arranyer Din Ratri is the last film which makes into the league.
Right. Now, let's delve in deeper into the film, and I wanted to do this by just starting a discussion about the scenes, some
Right.
of the pivotal scenes from the film, and for starters, just the beautiful opening credits of the film, the imagery of the dense forest passing by, as seen from the inside of the moving car, is sort of stenciled for the opening credits. And Ray was, of course, an illustrator and artist first, and then a filmmaker. And the opening credits are a reflection of his fine, artful sensibilities. One of the best opening credits in a Ray film.
Yes, and I will tell you the reasons what I feel. But one thing which we should keep in mind that Ray has always two, apart from many, but apart from many other qualities of his films, the two very important things were one, the opening credits, and you will find that most of his opening credits were absolutely flawless. It makes the audience glued to what is happening right from the word go. And
Yes.
second, he has fantastic posters to back up with. It, I don't remember any other filmmaker who has done all the posters, or at least the majority of the posters himself, and they themselves become characters. So that's a different discussion altogether. But coming to this, but before I will just start about or talk about this titles, the title credit sequence. There's a very interesting twist which Ray had given. Like in Bengali, Arranyer Din Ratri means days and nights of the forest. Arranyo ka din ratri, like in Hindi. But he made it days and nights in the forest and not of the forest. So I think just by changing the preposition from off to in, he straight away took the character of the forest out of focus from the title itself and embedded it as a character within, and that started off with the title sequence. So if you see the title sequence, as you rightly mentioned, it's such a tight shot, and the moment the camera focuses on the window frame and then it goes out, then we find that the forest becomes a character. The forest is there as a character. But very interestingly, the representation of forest normally, what we see in films and in the popular culture and also in literature, is something uh, which denotes grandeur, right? It's a symbol of grandeur. But in this film, if we see at later point in time, that it's very bare, it's very discreet, it's very bare, and the the film is, as you said, it's multi-layered, because I feel that there are so many pretenses, there are so many ironies which Ray is trying to show, and one of them is through these four characters, and their actions are exactly opposite of what they are saying in most of the cases. And that is how, when they are coming to embrace the forest, and they are saying that they want to attain salvation, or they want to shed their inhibitions, they want to get rid of the last lineage of civilization, so on and so forth. But actually, they cannot leave behind their ego, they cannot leave behind their vanity, they cannot leave behind their uh, class and caste consciousnesses. And in one very pivotal moment, you will find that the father character, the father of Aparna, uh, he's when he first meets them, he's asked them, "So you are from Calcutta? Oh, you are tourists." So they are actually not someone who can be assimilated in our ancient forest culture. They will only come as tourists and go back as tourists. So as I said, I think this title sequence is extremely important because it marks the barrier between these four and the forest. So they cannot probably cross that barrier. They cannot probably cross that window and be assimilated with the forest. So there will be a distinction. So they cannot become the tribal, or they cannot the as much they try dancing with them or being with them, but it's two different nations, and the window is through which we look at the other India.
Right, right. There is a distinct barrier, like you said, and that's interesting. And we'll talk more about this when we talk about the carnivalesque nature of the story,
Right.
Because that essentially deals with this mingling of people from different spheres, like what happens at a carnival. But before that, while remaining on the scenes from the film. Of course, the entire picnic scene is a showcase for Ray and Chumando Roy, Ray's longtime DOP. Their finesse in framing and creating the mood. And that whole sequence is just so stellar. One of the things that you often hear about Ray from actors or people, technicians who have worked with him, and I was watching some videos, interviews with artists and actors. And one of the things that keeps on coming up is that Ray was always big on the importance of the moment and capturing that moment. And this picnic sequence, in my opinion, is such a stellar example of that.
Yes, and it starts off with the memory game. So that memory game sequence, and I think
Yes.
you were referring to the fair scene. So those intercutting, those mostly sets of couples who are doing separate things, and with the deft intercuts. So, but the preceding one is that of the memory game,
Yes,
and
yes, absolutely.
and that itself is very masterfully done, uh, because it brings out so many things. Uh, and there is a lot which we can say about the memory game itself, because it brings about uh, the different characters and the philosophies which they probably believe in, or their lives reflect that. So, for example, that Shonjoy character, the names which he is saying are that of Karl Marx and Mao Zedong, and we find that he is the one who is actually having some leftist lineage, some leftist feelings, unlike most of the other three. One very interesting point is that which Ray hasn't told us, but it's there in the original novel, that what is the source of their friendship? Because we don't know whether they were friends in college, whether they were friends in the university, whether they were friends since childhood, but because they're so different from each other, so it becomes very interesting to find out that what makes them what makes them gel. But Ray keeps that as a suspense, and it's never revealed as such. But through these moments, we find out, like, these are the innate qualities of the individuals. Like Oshin, played by Soumitra Chatterjee, he says the names of Shakespeare and Mumtaz Mahal. And in a later sequence, as part of this picnic sequence, when Aparna and Oshim, they come out of that fair, and were standing in front of a tree, and Oshim is saying that I don't understand you, or a dialogue something like that, and she says that you probably haven't seen or experienced tragedy in real life, and then she tells that what happened to her brother and her mother and so on and so forth. But then we realize that tragedy to Oshim is only in literature. So he read tragedy in Shakespeare, he read tragedy about Mumtaz Mahal, but he has not faced any tragedy in her real life, as compared to a woman who actually experienced something which sets her apart from the rest. So I think the entire that sequence of starting from the memory game till the fair scene and the aftermath of that is from a technical perspective, it is extremely uh, beautiful. See, one charge which is normally leveled against Ray is that his films are slow. But if you see that the editing technique has such a pace that there is nothing which is actually happening on the screen as such from the narrative perspective, but there is so much pace that we have as audience, we feel there is a tension which is going on because we don't know like what's going to happen. And there are these four different mostly three different subplots which are happening in parallel, apart from Shekhar, who is a very interesting character completely by himself, because all the others, they go through a journey, a psychological journey. It is he who remains as is. There is no change. He came as a clown and he returns as a clown. But for all the other three, if you see that the subplots which are happening and the way Ray cuts the shots and the scenes, that I feel gives that element of tension. And that is, even if we say that this is more of an open-ended film and so on and so forth, that is where I think the climax happens.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, I think personally, this is one of the Ray's more captivating films right from the get-go. And the editing, like you said, has a lot to do with it. And there's a lot of craft, of course, but just for this, if we were to stick around with this, the memory game scene, most of us know that this scene was shot by swiveling the centrally placed camera to capture each person in the frame. And, Ray and the DOP, they have captured the frame so beautifully that everybody's pretty central in the frame. What else can you tell us about the craft behind this iconic scene?
Yes. So what I gathered from Soumitra Chatterjee in one of my interviews with him is that Ray did it in one take. So he was, as you said, he had the camera at the central position and he was just rotating it and placing it on each character. And when they saw it at the end, they found that it was always the characters were at the center. But I think that there, as I said, that apart from the craft part, there were certain other things which Ray was playing with. One very important thing I feel in Arranyer Din Ratri is the concept of the circle. When we see that the tribals are sitting, they are sitting in circles. When they're dancing, they're trying to create circles or semicircles, half circles, so on and so forth. But when the urban men and women sit in circles, they play a game which is a game of elimination. So they cannot collaborate in a circle. They can just get people out of the circle by playing a game which doesn't have a collaborative thing. And then when it cuts to the next scene, which is the fair scene, you'll find that they were in that merry-go-round sort of thing, which is also a circular thing. And that is in one axis. And when we see them on the ground, we see that there are other circles which are on a different axis, perpendicular to it. And the very next scene is the bangle shop. And again, we see lots of circles in that. So I think, and also if you see that if you think Arranyer Din Ratri is divided into 4 acts, that's what I want to look at it like that. So the first one is when they're coming, and the second one is they're getting up till the first night in the liquor shop. The third one is the liquor shop, the second morning till the liquor shop, and the fourth one is the final one, the memory game till the very end. Now the second and the third, if you look, it starts with the iris technology of fade in and fade out. So it's a circle which blows out, and we see the scene. And then there is a circular movement of the narrative, and they come back to the bungalow. The next one again is a iris technology. There is a circular fade in, fade out, and it is on a wristwatch, which is again a circle, and it says about time. And then there is a circular movement from the bungalow back to the bungalow again through the liquor shop. So I think Ray was playing with these concepts of circles at different planes, different philosophical levels. And the memory scene, as you said, is one which I felt is the circle of elimination, and that's what he's trying to say, that they're reflecting on the tribals who are, and that is the reason why you see that there are so many shots of the tribal music played on, and so on and so forth.
Speaking of circles, circling back to that quote by Sharmila Tagore about the women in Ray's films, I can think of 2 to 3 distinct scenes from this film which embody this very signature of Ray's. And I would love to hear what your take is on those scenes. I'll just quickly blurt out the scenes which I'm referring to. The first one is the one between the excellent Kaveri Bose and Shubhendu Chatterjee, where he struggles to kind of reciprocate her advances. It's she's trying to set herself free from the so-called prison of bourgeois moralities, while he's still not bold enough, mature enough to do the same. One of my favorite scenes is that terrific phone number scene. At the village fair,
yes.
Ashim insists on paying for everything, and Aparna obliges then. However, later that evening, when Ashim asks her for a phone number, she quickly scrawls it on a 5 rupee note and hands it over to Ashim. And this comes on the heels of her essentially letting him win the memory game as well. Again, both pivotal scenes that speak volumes about that common thread in Ray's films. And correct me if I'm wrong, and a considerable chunk of Bengali literature where the women are much stronger, more mature, and more resourceful than the man.
Yes. So if I take the last part first, Ray was very much influenced by Tagore as such. Nothing of Arranyer Din Ratri, but in general. And most of the Tagorean women are very strong, or I guess most or all of them were very strong
Right.
of the novel. So that had a very strong influence on the filmmakers and the writers who came after Tagore, because he set things right up there. And in this film as well, like the Joya character played by Kaveri Bose is absolutely a blinder. Right? She was one who was a very popular actress of the 1950s. She had runaway hits with Uttam Kumar, who was the leading man at the time. A real threat to Suchitra Sen, who was the most famous actress or heroine in the 50s and the 60s of Bengali cinema. And then she completely went off screen. She had her own family and so on and so forth. And it was hard that she once said that I will only return to films if Satyajit Ray casts me in any of his films. And that's what had happened. And I don't think anyone could have done justice to that role more than what she had done. And if you see that the very first time when we see this character, they were playing badminton in their own courtyard. And she was wearing all white, because not only because she was a widow, but if you see the lighting on her face and on her, it's absolutely dazzling white. And throughout, till that final scene, we find that she doesn't have an aura of mystery like Aparna. She was more frank, as if it's very easy to read her. Even in the memory game sequence, when she was there, she was probably the first one who was out, because she told some other name. But that moment in the evening, it's from a visual perspective also, it's a completely different person. She was wearing a dark sari, and the light on her face was different. And if you look at it from the other Ray films, in the night scenes, there is a radiance on the face. But I felt in this one, there is no radiance. She was one who was ahead of her times in a sense. And the man with whom she is at least interested, he is not at par. The other one which you mentioned about Aparna, that one is very very interesting in the sense that the whole concept of money and wallet being uh, a phallocentric symbol of man is established throughout the film. Like you find that the character of Hori, who is so obsessed about his wallet, though he loses it,
Right.
and then uh, in the first, think it is in the first of the two liquor shop sequences, this character of Duli came and she told that there was someone who gave her 5 rupees, and this Hari said that okay, if that Babu gave you 5 rupees, I will give you 25, something like that, and and this whole concept of buying by giving money, buying the local culture, buying the Santal women by paying money, and Shekhar in that particular scene just took the wallet out, and Hori was almost going in a fight with him. And later on, in the fair sequence, we'll find that Oshim was not letting Aparna pay for anything. And again, that's the reason why I said that the Shekhar was a very interesting character, because when he came and he asked for money for his gambling, he was okay to get money from Aparna, but it was Oshim who finally gave him. And Sanjay at that time was showing the wallet that this is full. You need not worry. You buy whatever you want to buy. And then when Aparna wrote that phone number on a piece of on a 5 rupee note and told him that probably something like this, that I didn't find any other paper or something like that. In essence, she was paying him back, isn't it? So
Absolutely.
it's almost like a slap on the face of this man who was for so long was boasting about the money which he has, the wallet being full, so on and so forth. And even before, like the character of Aparna and the quote you mentioned about, which Samira Tagore had mentioned somewhere, in the first time when they meet and this Oshim character goes up to her room and he looks into the different books this girl is reading, or the long playing records, and you'll find that it's an absolutely, I don't know, but it's a hybrid collection, right? And
yes. It's a very eclectic collection. Yes.
Very eclectic collection. And he said that I can't quite make you out from that collection. And I have a feeling that the reason why Aparna, the character of Aparna, was so different from the rest is because she was the only one through whom, or she was the character, or she was probably the symbol of the pre-independence Renaissance Bengal, where assimilation of different cultures and languages could happen seamlessly and easily. Now, Ray's men in this film, on the contrary, are representatives of a false nation. They're corrupt individuals. They have only westernized fantasies. If you look at the character like Opu or Omol, they also knew the other language, but they necessarily didn't have to have the Western influence on them so heavily. There is a very interesting use of English in the Bengali dialogues in this film. Now, after 50 years, it may seem very commonplace because we are always using that. But in that time, the use of a foreign language as a depiction of power was so apparent that creates that very interesting tension between the characters. But coming back to Aparna, she was one who was probably from a different time, and Ray was putting her not only as a flesh and blood human being, but also as a symbol of something which we have left behind in our process of becoming Western.
And it's interesting what you said about the use of English language. One of the most interesting characters is that of Rabigo Shaker. And one of my favorite bits is when he blurts out that 8 p.m. sharp and that appointment. And I never realized that angle. So thanks for bringing that up because that makes a lot of sense.
And you will find that he was the person who was always, he was the person who was speaking English the most. Like when they were having the bath scene and they were absolutely embarrassed, he was the one who goes out and says, "So kind of you," like in a very very
Right.
funny accent.
Yes.
And he was the person who gives money to these three Santal girls and says that this is tribal welfare. He was the person who says to the chokidar the first time they came of the Dak Banglo that do you know these people? They are all VIPs. No, the chokidar has no idea what VIP is. The only idea he had is that if something is said in English, that must be good. And like coming to this VIP thing, like if you remember the second night after the liquor shop when they were coming, they were on the streets and this headlight of the Aparna's car was on them. Then Oshim, and that is such an irony. Oshim was saying that जानते हो हम कौन है हम VIP है very important person not
Yes.
important but
Yes.
very important person and that sums up what Ray's view is of these people of these men these four men. So I think the use of the English, if you know the context, the use of the English within the Bengali dialogues is very important to understand when, and that is why they were using English whenever they were trying to show the power equation. So whenever there is this ranger who is stammering, so they were saying something in English. The moment the conservator comes who speaks in an accent which is even better than them and has a power equation which is probably at a higher level than theirs, they started speaking completely in Bengali. Ashim and Sanjay. He was speaking in English, and he was saying that give me one reason why I will allow you to stay in this bungalow without the official permission and so on and so forth. And they completely reverted to Bengali at that time, both of them. So I think that also is something which, and very interestingly, just going on because there are so many memories which are coming up.
No worries, please.
So when we see the ending of the first second act, by act I mean as I said the four acts which I divide the film into, and the second one is when they are returning from the liquor shop the first time. If you hear what they were singing "Sare Jahan Se Acha," which is such a parody of what they are and what their dreams are. That these are the things. If you look into, then you'll find that these are the things which Ray is trying to point out, not as dialogues, but as the side events, subplots, or even not a subplot. It's a subplot probably, but it shows like this is a pretense which they're making with themselves only, because they don't believe in a Sare Jahan Se Acha concept of India, something written by Iqbal so long back, and which has a completely different connotation. Their lives they're just chasing a dream in a city, in a metropolis, which is completely different from a philosophy of Sare Jahan Se Acha.
Right. I mean, there is certainly a muted commentary, if I may call that, on the entire bourgeois class, middle class. It comes out through the dialogues, like you said, but I think that particular undercurrent to the story is, I saw that throughout the film. Amitava, let's talk about the craft a little bit more. I love how the film has a great number of medium long shots where the characters kind of enter the frame as if walking into a painting. I thought that was very nicely done, and it's not the only Ray film where he has done that. But can you tell us a little bit more about why he and probably Roy they were such fans of those medium long shots?
Yes. So one, I have my own theory about Ray's usage of long shots. So in for example, sometime in the 1970s, probably he, in an interview, in an interview to a Western press, he commented that he laments not having the actors of the caliber of Lee Woolman and Bibi Anderson, the way uh, Bergman has his stock company, and that is the reason why he probably cannot deal with subjects with the way Bergman can, which I think is not probably the reason why he never uh, his camera never invaded the spaces the way Bergman's camera invaded, or probably Kurosawa's camera invaded, or probably Hitchcock's camera invaded. The main reason I think is one is that he has a very Brahminic uh, upbringing, and in that upbringing, he always preferred to look at life from an unobtrusive distance. And apart from that, there is a very, to me at least, there is a very technical reason as well. Throughout, mostly, at least till probably the first 10, 15 films, he was constantly taking newcomers. Like even after Arranyer Din Ratri, when he was making the Calcutta trilogy, all the three main characters, the heroes, were newcomers. Now, whenever you are actually having new actors in your film, the greatest problem which everyone has is what to do when there is no dialogue, right? And you will find that most of Ray's films, and this I can say with a lot of confidence in the context of Bengali cinema at least, most of the films before Ray had a particular type of acting. Now, with Ray's films, there is a certain semblance between the acting standards of the different actors. Someone may be 50 films old, someone may be one film. This is the first film. But you will not make out much difference between their acting patterns or their levels of acting. And one of the reasons was that Ray used to give certain businesses along with the dialogues. So whenever someone is not having a dialogue, he is probably lighting a cigarette. The woman may be doing something in the house, picking up something, reading a book, or doing something. So there are parallel activities, which in technical terms we call business, doing certain businesses within the frame. And that helped the actors, the new actors, and the child actors, uh, and that relieved them a lot. Now, if you have to show someone who is doing something with their hands, what will be your camera shot? It has to be at least a mid shot.
Hmm.
So if you see, very rarely Ray's camera intrudes or moves or goes fast onto the faces or onto any object and or a human being. The other trait of Ray, which is there in Arranyer Din Ratri, specifically in that after the picnic shot when Ashim and Aparna are discussing, and also when they go to find the Chowkidar's wife, that whenever there is a dialogue between two characters, which is of importance in the sense that is creating a tension of sorts and so on and so forth, then you will find that that's a two shot, right? But it's not almost never an over the shoulder shot. It is always both the characters in different depths of reference looking at the camera. You will find that in Opus Sangsar, you'll find that in Charulata, you'll find that in Mahanagar, you'll find that in Shimabadho, and also in Arranyer Din Ratri, or any film. I'm just mentioned the ones which came to my mind. So that is a very typical Ray frame, if we may say, that the two characters are at two different depths of fields, both looking at the character, but actually they are talking to each other. And using that technique, Ray shows the change of emotions on both of their faces, which otherwise would have been continuous shift of camera focuses. Coming to the long shots, there had been very painterly long shots in this film, as you rightly say, right from the beginning. Right from the beginning, when they come and they change their dresses, and Sanjay just moves up and says that you remember the days when we were in college or university or something like that, and we used to bring out literary magazines, and you will find that there is in the background, you will find that there is this sound of this cows going with this small bells on their necks. So, and you will find at times that there was this sets of tribal people going on in the in the background. So there is always this comparison, I think, between the main in the foreground, who are the urban male and female, and the background, and the background is either very bare, or you will find that there are people who are actually very far off from these people, and they neither can reach to that landscape, nor they can reach to the people who are there, who are part of the landscape. So if there are multiple scenes specifically after the picnic, we will find that, as you said, that those are quite painterly. So there is a landscape which is at the background. There are people who are moving there, and these are the people who are at the foreground. And there is, as I said in the beginning, there is an unsurmountable gap between the two, and that gap will never bridge.
My other favorite, if I may say, aspect of this film is
Right.
what I think kind of elevates it to another level, is that there is no finality to anybody's story in the film. The open-endedness of it, like you said,
Right.
that I always like that part of a film, because it kind of leaves you essentially, every member of audience can draw their own conclusions, and
Right.
that's why there are many different readings of the story. I want to talk more about this, but before that, if you will allow me, I just wanted to segue to the novel.
Right.
And talk a little bit about the carnivalesque literary tradition. So, as most of us know, the original novel by Sunil Gangopadhyay is in what is called carnivalesque literary tradition. And what is that? So, here's one way of thinking about it. This is the way that I think about it. Literary works in carnivalesque tradition often transpose qualities of a carnival or a fair into a literary language. So, for example, in Arranyer, the village fair, which can be thought of as a small version of a carnival, serves as a metaphor for coming together of or mingling of people from different spheres, which is what happens in the story, where you have these four friends from the city mingling with the two sisters and a tribal woman. And this goes back to what you were saying, I guess, a few minutes ago, when you mentioned that there's always this barrier that the forest has for this for men. And the Carnivalist stories essentially go on to explore what happens with the individual characters as a result of this mingling. So the characters and the changes to their character arcs, the fallouts among the characters, and so on. Now, if I understand correctly, Ray made substantial changes to the original story from Sunil Gangopadhyay's novel. Can you tell us what were those exact changes that Ray made for the adaptation?
Yes. So the first and foremost change which Ray made was, and which Sunil Gangopadhyay never quite liked, was the fact that he straight away changed the class of these four men. Like the four men in the novel, they were like, they had just taken a train from the Howrah station, and they didn't have tickets with them, and they decided that they will just get off the train wherever they would want to. So they were mostly like vagabonds. Probably only one had a job; the rest didn't have a job. So they were more of a not a very lumpen type, but definitely not the same class in which they belong. Like in the 60s, having an ambassador car and driving to a place makes you in a different economic league altogether, right? So that is one major change, and that is also reflected in the difference in the way the two texts actually progress. The other thing which I remember from reading the story was the fact that in the film you could make out that Oshim is the leader straight away, and Sanjay is the one who is mostly like who is quite like Oshim, but he's not exactly like Oshim in the sense that he has a lot of he has a lot of empathy for the chokidar and the class, but he was not exactly. He doesn't have the leadership qualities, and probably one of the reasons why he couldn't react to Joya's reactions. But in the novel, novel, there was no one was a leader as such. The four of them were almost on equal grounds, and the character of Shekhar was quite different. So he was not the clownish one, which in the film we find that he doesn't have a subplot of his own. And there is one very technical difference in that there was this character of Hori played by Samit Bhanja, the one who was having this affair with the Santal girl played by Simi Garwal.
Yes.
His name was Robi in the film. Ray changed it to Hori just because Robi Ghosh was playing a different character. So he thought that if uh, there is a character called Robi in the film who is played by a different person, then that may create a problem. The novel is more of adventure of four men. It doesn't have deeper introspection the way the film is. The film has so many layers, so many, and one of the reasons probably is that Sunil Gangopadhyay was actually it was written. It was a fiction, but based on an actual experience, which he and three of his friends had in in the forest. So he was part of it. So his vision was from that perspective, whereas Ray was trying to look at the youth of the time. So his perspective was completely different. So he didn't have that much sympathy for the characters. So he was more harsh, I guess, to an extent, to the male four characters. So there is a difference in introspection.
I see. And Ray also adapted Pratidwandi, which is also based on his novel. Were there substantial departures from the original story there as well?
Yes, it was also a minor novel of Sunil Gangopadhyay, and there also Ray uh, had changed a lot. Like the entire, like in Arranyer Din Ratri, you have the forest, and that is one of the things which in most of the Ray's films you'll find that there is an inanimate character. Like in Pather Panchali, there is this village which is a character. So apart from the human beings, in Kanchenjunga, the Himalayas, the Darjeeling is a character. In Arranyer Din Ratri, the forest is a character. Similarly, in the Calcutta trilogy or Protidwandi for that matter, the city of Calcutta is a character. Like if you look at Mohanagar as the other city film, which was in the early 60s, you'll find that the city is coming through the characters, but not as a character itself, separate from the individuals. But if you look at Protidwandi, you will find that the city itself, there are so many shots on the streets, people roaming, the character roaming around, and the equation and the representation of the brother and the sister in Protidwandi is something which Ray had added with more vigor, just to show this, or to probably to substantiate that the quote of Shonla Tagore. There also you'll find that the proverbial man of the house is the sister. She's the one who earns. The brother doesn't earn. None of the
Right.
brothers are. Right. So there Ray was using the mirror as a metaphor, as a motif rather, not a metaphor, but a motif. Time and again he was using the mirror as the motif to show the reflecting the man of the 60s or the man of the 70s, and how incapable that man is. It's all started off with probably with Arranyer Din Ratri, just continued with Pratidwandi and John Aranya mostly. Shimabadda is slightly different, but at least these two films.
And speaking of influences on the film, couple of Western influences, I guess, couple of Renoir's films come to mind when we think of Arranyer Din Ratri, A Day in the Country and Picnic on the Grass. The central theme from A Day in the Country is very similar to Arranyer, where we have a group of urban city dwellers visiting the countryside and mingling with the locals, and how those very experiences end up changing them. Some of the humor between the four friends harks back to Picnic on the Grass, I thought. Any other films or literary works that you can think of which might have had an influence on Ray while making this film?
Rules of the Game, since you mentioned Renoir, Rules of the Game comes into mind to an extent because of the overlapping of classes, though the upper class and the servants and so on and so forth. But technically speaking, it's quite different because there were a lot of deep focus shots in Rules of the Game. There are no, or very less, or probably no deep focus shots in Arranyer Din. It's mostly wide angle. So the treatments are different. And also, I think there is an element of, and this is probably, I feel there is an element of Chekhovian structure in in Arranyer Din Ratri, in the way that there are four acts. In that sense, Ibsen's plays also have four acts. But in Chekhov, you have this concept of plotlessness. So you find that the emphasis is on situations, more situations than, and that there are. He was probably not very interested in pursuing an action in the way Aristotle would have loved. He was more interested in dramatizing a condition or a situation. And also, like, the focus is more towards the collective than the individuals. So I feel that somewhere Ray also from Arranyer Din Ratri shifted his focus from that individual character to his first trial was in Arranyer Din Ratri with four characters. And then when he moved again to one character in the Calcutta trilogy, those characters were the faces of the crowd. None of the previous characters in Ray's films, the main characters in Ray's films, were faces of the crowd. They were one of the crowd. They were one out of the crowd. They were not part of the crowd. But if you look at the Calcutta trilogy, they were mostly, at least Protidwandi and Janaran, they were they were the faces of the crowd, and that comes out in his way of framing them as well. They were so tight shots in those films, so much shots with people around them who were strangers on the streets, on the buses, on the trams, and so on and so forth. But that major shift, I think, happened in Arranyer Din Ratri through a Chekhovian path.
Right. Yes, certainly there is that Chekhovian element, like you said. And I think that was noted in most of the Western, I think, critical takes on the film. I was reading some of the Western reviews, and they all mentioned. In fact, I was listening to an interesting interview of Ravi Ghosh. I'm pretty sure you have heard this. But he was talking about some of the critical reaction to the film. And you know how Ray often said that most of the people in India did not kind of relate with the cinema at that time when he was making the films, and there was a lot of praise and there was a lot of applause in the West. And Ravi Ghosh was talking about when I think it was Sight and Sound. It was some Western publication. I think it was Sight and Sound, which had mentioned that there were Chekhovian elements in this. And I think that's when a lot of people kind of realized, okay, we need to probably revisit this film to find the layers. It's not just about four friends not doing anything in the middle of the forest.
Right.
That was very interesting.
You see, if you look at Ray's oeuvre, he very seldom had the so-called like dialogues to vent the anger of the individual or something. So he just reflected based on certain elements, like that 5 rupee note giving back and things like that, or that usage of the English words at times when you think that will work against people who don't know that language. Or someone like the Ranger, you can make out that he is trying to speak a different language based on his vernacular upbringing. And these people are looking down upon them. And now if we look at 50 years from this film, then we see that how we have created so many countries within our own country. And it started off, there's a reflection of that in Arranyer Din Ratri.
Very interesting. Very nice point. Amitava, what do you think is the legacy of the film as we sit here in 2020 and Arranyer turns 50, like we mentioned before, since it was released in 1970? What do you think is the legacy of the film today, especially because Ray is such a master and he has a towering body of work. And like we already touched upon how this film is a junction between, you can look at Ray's filmography before this film and after this film. But besides that, looking back as an influential film, what do you think is the legacy of this film?
Unfortunately, I don't think there is much legacy of the film apart from the fact that people think that it's an absolute masterpiece. There was one sequel of sorts which was made by...
Can I pause you there for a minute? And,
sorry.
Yes. Ask you, if I may just ask you before you proceed. Why was it that it wasn't until recently that people saw the beauty in this film? I mean, I discovered this film about a few years ago. So I'm, pretty new to this film as well. But the first time I saw it, I was just in love with Shekhar's character, and
Right.
I got the undercurrents and everything. But on repeated viewings, there's just so much depth to it. But I'm wondering why people of the prior generation, or who have, especially people from friends of Bengali cinema, did not speak about this in the same breath as the Apu trilogy or the Calcutta trilogy.
I think what one of the problems which this film could have posed, I don't know, like uh, the reason why this was not very well watched was I don't remember what the census certificates show, but because of that lovemaking scene, this was not a film which was shown as part of the typical at that time. I'm talking about the 70s or the 80s when television first came,
Makes
and
sense, right?
we used to have those Bengali cinema on Saturday nights, evenings, and the Hindi cinemas on the Sunday evenings, or the reverse. I don't remember right now. And this was one of the films which was not shown. Now, I remember the first time it was shown was part of a, it may not be the first time, but the one which I recollect was part of a retrospective after Ray passed away, and it was part of the late night feature films. So there was something in the Indian television called the late night feature films, which was supposedly the adult films. That is the reason which they didn't get a slot in the proper time. And I guess there were problems with the print quality and so on. So that was the reason why the film was not available for watching as such by large audience. Once it was made available, then I think by that time the audience became also mature of watching a lot of other types of films, the foreign films and the international films, where they could see that this parallel storytelling, this parallel subplots happening at the same time, specifically the last sequence. All of these are happening in parallel. The Ashim Apanna story, the Joya Sanjay story, and the Hori and Duli story. These three are happening at the same time. That type of a breaking of the narrative structure was probably something which earlier people found it difficult, because Ray was known to be a master of linear narrative. So he was not very much into breaking the narratives. But in this one, at least in that part, he was trying to have parallel subplots going on in the same time frame.
Makes sense, yeah. And obviously, every generation adds a certain context to it, I guess, in their reading of a film. So that makes a difference too.
Well, since you just asked about the legacy, I don't want to say that that film has any bearing with Arranyer Din Ratri, but somehow while I was watching Death in the Ganj by Konkona Sen Sharma, I
Oh,
had this
yes,
feeling of
yes,
Arranyer Din
yes,
Ratri somehow. The entire story
yes,
is different, but still there was something which it came into my
yes,
mind. I cannot
absolutely.
explain.
Yes, I think the Death in the Gunj. I think what it does within the family, what Arranyer does with a set of friends. I think that's essentially transposed in what it does to a family, or close
Right.
set of people. So definitely, yes, that makes perfect sense. Amitava, that was great. There is a lot more we can talk about this beautiful film
Yes.
that I've come to love a lot, but we have limited time here. Anything else
Right.
you would like to add to the discussion, which people might not know about this beautiful film?
I just want to probably draw attention to this character of Shekhar, which you just said that you loved it in your
Yes,
first
yes,
visit. So to me, he's most like the Shakespearean fool, like who knows everything, and he is the Shutradhar in our Indian context, in India storytelling context. We have this concept called the Shutradhar, who is actually holding the strings. So he doesn't change, he remains as is. He was the clown in the beginning, and he remains the clown in the end. But he was the one who was unfazed by whatever had happened around him. I think he's very interesting character. The other interesting character to me is the Chokidar, and he is the one who closes it on us in the final one. He is the one who closes it. So if Shekhar starts it off, the Chokidar closes it. So I think more than the Chowkidar, probably Shekhar is a very interesting character. He doesn't change. but he is the one probably who looks at all of them with an amount of self-pity.
Right. And finally, is there a decent DVD or Blu-ray available of this?
I am not sure about Blu-ray, but I had a DVD version sometime back. I don't
I
know
see.
where it exists now, but I think I had watched the YouTube version sometime back. I thought that it is quite good, and subtitles were quite decent as well. At times, you know that the subtitles are lost almost uh, most of the times, but in this one, I thought that it was pretty good.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's not bad by any means. I recently watched it on YouTube again for this particular episode, and I'll put a link to it in the episode note.
Yeah, that's one final thing which I
Please.
probably there is one aspect of the film which I didn't like, in the sense that I always thought that Ray, like many of us probably as well, um, was a very city person, and he had always made films on the class whom he knew, and I thought when he was depicting these tribal people, somewhere he probably devalued them a lot. Like, say, for example, not only the character of the Santal girl who can be bought by money and so on and so forth, but even this character of Lokha, who was not a thief, right? But in the end, they made him a thief. So somewhere I thought that his reflection of the class which he did not know came out quite stark in this film. So that is the only one area which I
see.
probably don't like much in Arranyer Din Ratri. But from the technique, the craft, it's a master film.
Very interesting. Was Laka a thief in the novel as well?
No, in the he was blamed in the first place when this character of Hori beat him up, but he didn't take the wallet afterwards. So there was a fight. So he and some of his friends cornered this character. Character was called Roby in the novel, and beat him up, but they did not take the money. They were only interested in giving him a lesson for meddling with their women.
Right. Yeah, since I've not read the novel, I'm not familiar with the plot lines in the novel, but that's an interesting point that you brought up. Well, thank you so much for joining me while I ramble on and you put in a lot of insights. So this was great.
No, it was great talking about Satyajit Ray's film. Always.
Yes.
My pleasure.
Yes. And just for the listeners, actually, I had reached out to Amitava to do an episode on Nayak, which is my favorite Ray film. But then we decided to do it on Arranyer Din Ratri, since it's turning 50 this year, and since it's probably my second favorite Ray film. So, maybe sometime again we will do this on Nayak as well.
Sure.
Great. Thank you so much, Amitava.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
As always, one of my attempts with the podcast is to ignite curiosity about a film among those who haven't seen the film, and nudge the rest who are familiar with the film to revisit the film. Hope we were able to achieve both. If you like the episode, do spread the word. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, do drop us a review when you get a chance. Also, Amitava has a great series of video lectures on YouTube titled Ray at 100, covering a wide range of topics related to Ray's cinema. Don't forget to check that out. You can follow me on Twitter at loveofcinemasf8 for podcast-related updates and my tweets on all things movies. That's the episode. This is Himanshu signing off, and like always, thank you for listening to the Love of Cinema podcast.